Mayfield Heights.
Has left the conference.
Due to COVID-19 public health emergency, this evening's meeting will be held audio conference. Shanisha, may I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Balstria.
Present.
Mr. DeJohn.
Here.
Mrs. Finney.
Here.
Mr. Mano.
Here.
Mrs. Sabetta.
Here.
Mrs. Snyder.
Here.
Has left the conference.
Here.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Next is the approval of the minutes from the council meeting of February 8th, 2021. I hope everyone has had time to read these. Is there a motion to approve the minutes?
Moved.
Move, Finney.
Moved by Mr. Mano, second by Mrs. Finney. Are there any suggested changes, amendments, or deletions to those minutes? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Nay. The meeting minutes have now been approved. Next, we will move to correspondence and announcements. Does any member of council have any correspondence or announcements? Seeing none. At this time, I'm going to ask for a motion to move Resolution 2021-10 as our next agenda item.
Move, Finney.
Moved by Mrs. Finney.
Second.
Second by Mrs. Tressi. Roll call on the motion.
Mr. Mano.
Yes.
Mr. Balstria.
Yes.
Mr. DeJohn.
Yes.
Mrs. Sabetta.
Yes.
Mrs. Teresi.
Yes.
Mrs. Finney.
Yes.
Mrs. Snyder.
Yes. Mr. Murphy, 2021-10.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Resolution 2021-10, a resolution honoring Joseph Newman for his service as the city's representative to the Euclid Creek Watershed and Public Involvement and Public Education Committee for the city of Mayfield Heights, Ohio. First reading.
Is there a motion to suspend the rules?
Moved.
Move, Finney.
Mr. Mano, second by Mrs. Sabetta. Roll call on the motion to suspend.
Mr. DeJohn.
Yes.
Mrs. Finney.
Yes.
Mrs. Teresi.
Yes.
Mr. Balstria.
Yes.
Mr. Mano.
Yes.
Mrs. Sabetta.
Yes.
Mrs. Snyder.
Yes. Is there a motion to approve?
Moved.
So moved.
Move, Finney.
Moved by Mrs. Finney, second by Mrs. Tressi. I'm going to turn this over to you, Mayor.
Thank you, Madam President. Again, as we said, resolution number 2021-10, introduced by myself and every member of council here, is a resolution honoring Joseph H. Newman's memory for the city of Mayfield Heights, Ohio. And I know, as Joe was so fond of calling her, his significant other, Carol is here to accept. I will read it from here, and we usually have you come up here, but for the current situation, I'll read it from here, and I'll be happy to come down and give it to you. So, a resolution honoring Joseph H. Newman's memory from the city of Mayfield Heights, Ohio. Whereas Joseph H. Newman was born on December 1st, 1928, and was raised in the Bronx and Queens boroughs of New York. And whereas Joe graduated from the High School of Science in New York and attended Bethany College in West Virginia, earning a bachelor's degree in economics. Joe continued his education, earning a master's degree in business from Columbia University in New York. And whereas Joe and his wife Ruth raised 3 children, Deborah, David, and Mark, and whereas Joe moved to Cleveland, married Nancy Kramer, and they moved to Mayfield Heights in 1990. Joe worked as a business marketing consultant and retired in 1995. And whereas Joe was a member of the Temple Tifereth Israel in Beechwood and a man of great integrity and honesty, strive to make the world a better place, and Joe generously offered his time to the city of Mayfield Heights for over 20 years. He enthusiastically worked until the young age of 92. And whereas Joe respectfully served on the Mayor's Advisory Committee, the Tax Incentive Review Committee, and proudly served as the city's representative to the Euclid Creek Watershed and Public Involvement and Public Education Committee in the city of Mayfield Heights, and all who were fortunate to know him will be enriched by his passion, love, and support. And therefore, now be resolved by the City of Mayfield Heights, County of Cuyahoga, State of Ohio, that the administration, the City Council, and the residents of Mayfield Heights extend their most sincere condolences to the Newman family. His dedication and service to the community will always be remembered. Passed February 22nd, 2021. We miss you, Joe. We miss Joe's presence here at every council meeting. And he's going to be, they're very hard shoes to fill. So we hope this is some consolation to the family. So, Joe, we miss you, and let's give him a round of applause.
Has left the conference.
I just want to say he was an amazing man, and we will miss seeing him in that front seat. Thank you. Roll call on the motion to approve.
Mrs. Teresi,
Yes.
Mrs. Sabetta,
Yes.
Mrs. Finney,
Yes.
Mr. Mano,
Yes.
Mr. DeJohn,
Yes.
Mr. Balstria,
Yes.
Mrs. Snyder.
Yes. Resolution 2021-10 has been adopted. Now we will move back to the reports and officers, starting with the mayor.
Thank you, Madam President. Good evening, everyone. I hope everybody's enjoying the heat wave we had today. We have more to come. Sure feels good. Residents should have received a copy of the City Focus in the mail last week. Just a reminder to residents that it is a wealth of information for the community, including a review of 2020 goals, review of 2020, I should say, and goals for the year ahead. So there's a lot of information in there to be had, so I hope everyone takes advantage of that information. We've been faced with many challenges over the past year, and unfortunately, scammers have exploited the pandemic in many ways. The latest is a scam involving unemployment insurance. They fraudulently file for benefits using stolen names and social security numbers. And if you suspect your identity was misused by scammers, report the fraud to the unemploymenthelp.ohio.gov and your employer. I personally know 4 people who have been contacted by scammers regarding unemployment applications, so please be careful. It's going around very rapidly. It's always a pleasure to welcome new businesses and growth to the city. Starbucks is scheduled to start construction the first week of April. That is a reconstruction of the Sonic site, a redevelopment, I should say, of the current building. Just-in-time staffing will be relocating from Mainland Shopping Center to 6165 Mayfield Road, which is directly across the street here from us. Preliminary site plan approval for a 8,400 square foot medical office building located at 30055 Cedar Road is scheduled for the March 15th Planning Commission meeting. Setback variances will be required, and the applicant will be formulating an application for BZA. The CubeSmart project on Golden Gate is scheduled for March 15th PC meeting and the March 18th ABR meeting. And lastly, I had the pleasure last week of swearing in Shondor Thomas as a patrol officer. On behalf of the City Council and Administration, we welcome Officer Thomas to the city, and we wish him all the luck. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mayor. Are there any questions for the mayor? Moving to Law Director, Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have no formal report, but I would like to note that with regard to ordinance number 2021-06, which is on third reading, I've received requests from the tenant of the Mayor property as well as all of the owners indicating that they would like to see the property put into the new U5 automotive district. So at this point, it would be proper to move to approve that legislation. Secondly, I'd like to note that I would request an executive session at the end of regular business to discuss negotiations regarding collective bargaining. And that's all.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Are there any further questions? Director of Finance, Mrs. Fagan.
Thank you. I have no report this evening.
Are there any questions for Mrs. Fagan? Next, we will move to reports of committees, commissions, and boards, starting with the Building Committee, Mrs. Tressi.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I have no report this evening.
Thank you. Finance and Audit Committee, Mr. Belstraya.
Thank you, Madam Chair. No report.
Legislative Committee, Mrs. Finney.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. The legislative committee met last week, and you guys will be copied in the minutes. They're just being approved actually today. So hopefully you'll get those out in the next day or so.
Thank you, Mrs. Finney. Any questions for Mrs. Finney's report? Public Works and Service, Mr. DeJohn.
Thank you, Madam President. Mr. Balestria and myself and Mr. Gerson will be reviewing the streets, taking a ride down our streets to assess them after the winter damage. And then we'll be meeting, once that's completed, to finalize our 2021 road program. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeJohn. Are there any questions for Mr. DeJohn? Parks and Recreation, Mr. Mano.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Parks and Rec will meet tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. in these chambers. That's my report.
Thank you, Mr. Mano. Safety and Transportation, Mrs. Sabetta.
Thank you, Madam President. Though there was no meeting, the Neighborhood Watch will be calling a meeting on March 10th at 6 p.m. here in City Council chambers. This will be via social distancing guidelines, and masks are required. You need to let the Neighborhood Watch know if you are able to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Sabetta. Board of Zoning Appeals, Mrs. Sabetta.
Thank you again, Madam President. There are 2 items on the agenda. Council should have the BZA meeting minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Planning Commission, Mr. Belstraya.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Planning Commission did meet last week. As a result, we have Resolution 2021-7 on the agenda this evening. This is for an approval for a lot consolidation for the Mayland properties. It was approved by the Planning Commission unanimously, and it was also approved by the city engineer. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Belstraya. Next, we will move to comments from the public, but due to COVID-19 crisis, the state of Ohio has established guidelines for public gatherings. In an effort to keep residents, all members of the public, council representatives, and the other city employees safe during this time, the City of Mayfield Heights has closed the city council meetings to public attendance. Because public participation and transparency are important values of the city, residents are invited to call in and listen to the meeting via audio. Additionally, questions and/or comments may be submitted to the council office by noon to Mrs. Fagan. At this time, did you receive any questions, Mrs. Fagan?
I do have one request for communication to be shared this evening. It is from Wayne Natali on Woodhawk Drive. It is a very detailed correspondence with footnotes. I'll read the body of the letter, but I'm not going to read the footnotes this evening, and council did all receive this. And it states, last week I received a copy of the City Focus State of the City 2021 brochure in the mail. I am sure that many of the projects and efforts highlighted in the report are great news for the community, but I felt it lacked transparency and information on detailed proposals concerning the Woodhawk Drive Community Connector project. The brochure describes the Transportation for Livable Community Initiatives, the TLCI grant, which funded a comprehensive citywide study to identify long-term objectives for community connectivity by way of pedestrian and cycling paths within the city. The only projects that tangentially related to the bike pedestrian facilities, which are described in the City Focus brochure, are the intersection safety improvements and Marshall Road underpass improvements. No mention is made of the Woodhawk Drive Community Connector. It is my understanding that funding for that project is still pending, but the City Focus brochure lacks substantive details of a proposal that will significantly and detrimentally impact the residents of Woodhawk Drive and the neighboring condominiums. The brochure suggests that 490 responses to 2 surveys sent to the community via U.S. mail and email showed an overwhelming enthusiasm for new bike pedestrian facilities within the city. The survey referenced in the City Focus brochure is presumably the Parks and Recreation Department Community Engagement Survey, a summary of which is available on the city's website. Questions 16, 17, and 19 of the survey are the only questions that reference trails or connectivity, and only in a very general way. Moreover, the specific comments elicited in question 19 make no suggestion of a bike pedestrian path down Woodhawk Drive. Even if the responses to the survey trended positive, I respectfully call into doubt any meaningful conclusions reached from only 490 responses. According to 2010 census data available on the city's website, there are 19,155 residents in Mayfield Heights. By my rough calculations, this means that only about 2.5% of the city residents responded to the survey. I will tell you, and I know others have already expressed the same to members of council and the mayor's office, that there is no enthusiasm over any project that calls for the narrowing of Woodhawk Drive, as this project proposes to do. I have done some rough demographics on the ages of Woodhawk Drive residents to
is now in the conference.
I have done some rough demographics on the ages of Woodhawk Drive residents to try to understand whether there was apathy
Is now in the conference.
or misunderstanding regarding the surveys
Is now
conducted.
in the conference.
While I cannot reach any conclusions regarding apathy, the intent of the survey may not have been clear. Several of my neighbors have indicated they do not even recall getting the surveys. Those that did do not recall any questions regarding a multipurpose trail on Woodhawk Drive. I would therefore challenge the city to conduct a targeted survey of Woodhawk Drive residents and residents of the condominium project adjacent to Woodhawk Drive. Such a survey should explicitly detail the current Woodhawk Drive Community Connector proposal, namely narrowing Woodhawk Drive by 6 feet, demolishing the existing concrete sidewalk on the north side of Woodhawk Drive, and constructing a paved pedestrian bike path 30 feet from residents' front doors. A few weeks ago, Recreation Director Sean Ward delivered some information to a neighbor, purportedly from a study extolling the correlation between access to pedestrian bike paths and enhanced property values. The report references the Little Miami Scenic Trail in southwest Ohio as an example of enhanced property values close to a pedestrian bike path. I am more than familiar with the Little Miami Scenic Trail, as the closest access point to the Little Miami Trail was 3.1 miles from my former residence in Clark County, Ohio. The Little Miami Scenic Trail was constructed on the corridor of the former Little Miami Railroad. At no point does the Little Miami Scenic Trail come even remotely close to 30 feet from a domestic residence.
Mrs. Fagan,
Yes.
I'd ask you to stop here because that's 5 minutes, and that's what he would be allotted if he were here live. If council wanted to move to permit additional times, you can read his statement. That's up to council.
I need a motion to extend this portion for Mrs. Fagan. Moved by Mr. Mano, second by Mr. Balestria. Roll call on the motion to extend.
Yes.
Mrs. Teresi,
Yes.
Mrs. Sabetta,
Yes.
Mr. DeJohn,
Yes.
Mrs. Finney,
Yes.
Mr. Mano,
Yes.
Mrs. Snyder.
Yes. Thank you, Mrs. Fagan.
Thank you. The correspondence continues on to say, Mr. Ward's materials are wholly irrelevant to the proposed Woodhawk Drive Community Connector project. Most concerning to me, however, is not property values, but rather the safety of Woodhawk Drive residents and those of the adjoining condominiums. It is appalling to me that the city would consider beautification or recreation accessibility at the expense of rapid response by fire, police, or EMT personnel to a resident on Woodhawk Drive or in the condominiums, a response that would become assuredly delayed due to a narrower street. The city-focused brochure details 4,130 fire runs in the city in 2020. How many of them took trucks down Woodhawk Drive or into the condo project? There were 19,665 total police calls. How many of those were to our neighborhood? We see EMT vehicles on the street weekly. Imagine the tragedy and liability the city could face if delays reaching residents is compromised because it was difficult to navigate the narrower street. This is not a promises kept. Excuse me. I have been told this street was built 30 feet wide due to the concern the traffic from the 600-unit condominium project would be heavy. Hundreds, if not thousands of cars traverse Woodhawk daily. In the spring, summer, and fall, landscaper and service vehicles often clog this 30-foot wide street. Imagine the congestion and danger if it is 6 feet narrower. Nothing has changed since the city had the wisdom and foresight to make this road 30 wide. In fact, traffic on the street has only increased since that decision was made. I have corresponded with Northeast Ohio Area-Wide Coordinating Agency, NOACA, to express many of the above concerns to them. My original letter was to Grace Galucci, Executive Director and CEO. I received a reply from Danielle Render, Director of External Engagement and Public Affairs. Ms. Render
Is now in the conference.
Ms. Render provided me the correct format to formalize my concerns about the Woodhawk Drive Community Connector Grant proposal.
Firefighters of Local 1500.
I intend to submit
Is
my
now in the conference.
I intend to submit my comments prior to their April 9th review of this grant request. I will encourage neighbors to do likewise. Time is of the essence for the mayor and city council to meet with impacted residents as promised in earlier communications with the mayor to hear the city's position as well as hear our concerns. While the pandemic creates challenges to hold such a meeting, perhaps a large venue such as a school, gym, or church could be utilized to allow for a safely distanced opportunity to discuss this. An alternative would be to simply cancel any plans to narrow Woodhawk Drive and proceed with the badly needed resurfacing effort this spring.
John Fortune.
Is now in the conference.
Please do not lose sight of the overriding reasons not to narrow Woodhawk Drive and consider the safety and well-being of residents in your thought process.
Zach.
Is now in the conference.
And that concludes the correspondence.
Thank you, Mrs. Fagan. There are a few people here this evening that may have something on the agenda tonight. If you would like to be heard, please approach the podium, state your name and address for the record. This time, is there anyone here this evening that would like to be heard? Seeing none, we're going to close this portion. Move to resolutions. Starting with 2021-2, Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Resolution 2021-02, a resolution confirming the action of the Board of Zoning Appeals of the City of Mayfield Heights in granting to Urman Building Company a variance to install
Roy Jenkins.
Is now in the conference.
a 5-foot 6-inch monument sign for 5915 Landerbrook Drive, Cuyahoga County, permanent parcel number 861-30-030.
Roy Jenkins.
Has left the conference.
First reading.
Thank you. Is there a motion to suspend the rules?
Move, Finney.
Moved by Mrs. Finney, second by Mrs. Tressi. Roll call on the motion to suspend.
Mrs. Finney,
Yes.
Mr. DeJohn,
Yes.
Variance.
Mr. Mano,
Is now in the
Mr.
conference.
Balstria,
Yes.
Mrs. Sabetta,
Yes.
Mrs. Teresi,
Yes.
Mrs.
Has left the
Snyder,
conference.
Yes. Is there a motion to approve?
Moved.
Moved by Mr. Mano, second by Mr. Balestrea. Mrs. Sabetta, this item was seen before the BZA. Would you like to speak? Yes.
I would like to ask if the gentleman is here from Urman. I don't, yes, and he may want to speak. Yes. Okay. Better?
You can come forward to the podium. To make sure your mic is green, just press that little button. If it's red, turn it on green. And just state your name and address
Bill
for the record.
Barnett, 5915 Landerbrook Drive, Mayfield Heights, Ohio.
Thank you.
I represent Urman Building Company, I'm sorry. Connection with the application for a variance to erect a monument sign in front of the building. Variance is for a request to have a 6-inch variance from the 5-foot height requirement in order to make the sign more visible from the street.
Maynard Newman.
Has left the conference.
We presented before the BZA and responded to their inquiries with respect to the sign.
Zach.
Has left the conference.
And we're requesting that this decision by the BZA be affirmed.
Thank you. Does any member of council have any questions? Mr. Holman?
Philip Cunningham.
Is now in the conference.
This was a 3-2 vote by the BZA. Mrs.
Al
Sabetta, would you
Garza.
like to add anything further?
Has left the conference.
Much.
Yes, the building has 2 ingress and egress. And there are temporary tenant signs are posted at both. The monument sign that they have now is at one entrance. The building sets beyond the parking. There's need for visibility. No names or address are on the building. The existing monument sign has a base with 5 tenant names. There are now 6 tenants. The applicant spoke of the GPS factor, stating that not everyone uses it, even if they have it.
Has left the conference.
And we are talking about a 6-inch variance, and there's plenty of room for the sign. And I felt the applicant demonstrated practical difficulty, though the vote was 3-2. It is to recommend the variance, and all members were present.
Thank you, Mrs. Sabetta. Does any member of council have any questions for either the applicant or Mrs. Sabetta? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, council.
Now I have a roll call on the motion to approve.
Mrs. Sabetta,
Yes.
Mr. Mano,
Yes.
Mr. Balstria,
Yes.
Mrs. Teresi,
Yes.
Mrs. Finney,
Yes.
Mr. DeJohn,
Yes.
Tommy.
Mrs. Snyder,
Yes.
Is now in the conference.
Resolution 2021-2 has been granted. Moving to resolution number 2021-3, Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Resolution 2021-03, a resolution confirming the action of the Board of Zoning Appeals of the City of Mayfield Heights in granting to Jessica Jamie, 5949 Mayflower Avenue, a variance to construct a rear addition 8 feet into the required rear setback. Cuyahoga County Permanent Parcel Number 861-27-027. First reading.
Is there a motion to suspend the rules?
Moved.
Moved by
Move,
Mrs.
Finney.
Tressi, second by Mr. Balestrea. Roll call on the motion to suspend.
Mr. Mano.
Yes.
Mr. Balstria.
Yes.
Mr. DeJohn.
Yes.
Mrs. Sabetta.
Yes.
Mrs. Teresi.
Yes.
Mrs. Finney.
Yes.
Mrs. Snyder.
Yes. Is there a motion to approve? Moved by Mrs. Tressi, second by Mrs. Sabetta. Discussion. This agenda item was also presented to the BZA on February 9th. This was a variance to build an addition rear to the applicant's house. The vote was a unanimous decision by the BZA. Mrs. Sabetta, would you like to add anything to this?
Thank you, Madam President. I do not see the applicants here. The addition needs 16 feet, causing an 8-foot variance, leaving the backyard lot at 19 by 50. The shed is not in the site plan, but on the property. If the applicant conformed to the zoning code,
Has left the conference.
it would be an 8-foot addition, and that is considered not feasible. Considering only that there's so much land to work with, the expanding family, addition bringing value to the property, the strict enforcement of the ordinance would impose, on the owner a practical difficulty in the use of their property. It was a unanimous vote to recommend the variance. All members were present. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Sabetta. Are there any questions from council? Roll call on the motion to approve.
Mr. DeJohn.
Yes.
Mrs. Finney.
Yes.
Mrs. Teresi.
Yes.
Mr. Balstria.
Yes.
Mr. Mano.
Yes.
Mrs. Sabetta.
Yes.
Mrs. Snyder.
Yes. This resolution has now been adopted. Resolution number 2021-4, Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Resolution 2021-04, a resolution authorizing a memorandum of understanding with the Kyogre Soil and Water Conservation District and the Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District to provide technical assistance regarding public information and public education during 2021, ratifying all steps taken to date to enter said agreement and declaring an emergency. First reading.
Thank you. Is there a motion to suspend the rules?
Move, Finney.
Moved by Mrs. Finney, second by Mrs. Sabetta. Roll call on the motion to suspend.
Mrs. Teresi.
Yes.
Mrs. Sabetta.
Yes.
Mrs. Finney.
Yes.
Mr. Mano.
Yes.
Mr. DeJohn.
Yes.
Mr. Balstria.
Yes.
Mrs. Snyder.
Yes. Is there a motion to approve?
Moved.
Moved by Mr. Mano, second by Mrs. Tressi. This resolution authorizes to continue the public information and PIPE program for 2021. The program is estimated to cost $6,000 per year, and the cost of the program shall not exceed that amount. Some or all of this cost may be reimbursed to the city by the sewer district pursuant to the stormwater management program. Mayor, do you have anything you'd like to add?
I just think it's apropos that this comes out the night we give Joe Newman his resolution, so I think it's pretty appropriate.
Yes.
Perfect. Any other questions or comments at this time? Okay, roll call on the motion to approve.
Mr. Balstria.
Yes.
Mrs. Teresi.
Yes.
Mrs. Sabetta.
Yes.
Mr. DeJohn.
Yes.
Mrs. Finney.
Yes.
Mr. Mano.
Yes.
Mrs. Snyder.
Yes, this resolution is adopted. Moving to resolution number 2021-5, Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Resolution 2021-05, a resolution authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with Larkin Greenwood Ford for the purchase of 3 Ford SUV police interceptor cruisers for use by the Mayfield Heights Police Department and declaring an emergency. First reading.
Is there a motion to suspend the rules?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Sabetta, second by Mrs. Teresi. Roll call on the motion to suspend.
Mrs. Finney,
Yes.
Mr. DeJohn,
Yes.
Mr. Mano,
Yes.
Mr. Balstria,
Yes.
Mrs. Sabetta,
Yes.
Mrs. Teresi,
Yes.
Mrs. Snyder.
Yes. Is there a motion to approve?
Move, Finney.
Moved by Mrs. Finney, second by Mrs. Teresi. I wanted to just make a quick note on the actual resolution and the contract. It states that the contract would be made to Larkin Greenwood Ford, but it is written as Lebanon Ford. But that correction could be made. This would be authorizing the police departments to purchase 3 new cruisers at the total cost of $99,487 plus equipment not to exceed $30,000. This purchase is part of the Ohio Cooperative Purchasing Program. All members should have received a copy of a memo from Chief Bittner. Does any member of council have any questions? Seeing none, roll call on the motion to approve.
Mrs. Sabetta,
Yes.
Mr. Mano,
Yes.
Mr. Balstria,
Yes.
Mrs. Teresi,
Yes.
Mrs. Finney,
Yes.
Mr. DeJohn,
Yes.
Mrs. Snyder.
Yes. This resolution has been approved. Resolution number 2020-6, Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Resolution 2021-06, a resolution authorizing the mayor to enter an agreement with IO Solutions to provide civil service promotional testing services in the city of Mayfield Heights and declaring an emergency. First reading.
Is there a motion to suspend the rules?
Moved.
Moved by Mr. Mano,
Second.
second by Mr. Balestrea. Roll call on the motion to suspend.
Mr. Mano,
Yes.
Mr. Balstria,
Yes.
Mr. DeJohn,
Yes.
Mrs. Sabetta,
Yes.
Mrs. Teresi,
Yes.
Mrs. Finney,
Yes.
Mrs. Snyder.
Yes. Is there a motion to approve?
Move.
Move, Finney.
Moved by Mrs. Finney, second by Mr. Balestrea. All members should have received an invoice with explanations about IO Solutions. This resolution is proposed to offer service to the police department to provide the promotional testing service in the amount not to exceed $55,000 and to be invoiced as the services are provided. Mayor, would you like to explain how this is currently done, or if any member of council has any comments or questions?
This is requested by Civil Service Commission to switch this to this company. That's how it came about.
Perfect. Mr. DeJohn?
Yes, I'm hope that the Civil Service Commission sent this out for bid. I didn't have a chance to contact anyone on the commission, but I'm assuming that they did their due diligence and sent this out for a bid.
Mrs. Fagan?
Thank you. I do know, because several questions were posed earlier today, and so I did research some answers. They did interview several companies because it is considered a professional service. It did not go out for a formal bid, but they did interview several companies, and this was the company they chose as being the best solution for the city.
Thank you.
Mrs. Tressi?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you, Mrs. Fagan, for answering that question for me via email. Who did we use prior to going out with this company, or going out for interviewing? Didn't we use a local company?
It's the one you stated in your email. Didn't you ask that question in the email? It's the one, right? Yeah.
I don't know who it was, but wasn't it a local company?
Yes, it was. The one you,
It was.
yeah, the one you stated in your email, yeah.
I didn't state any name in my email.
I'm sorry, can I respond?
Mayor?
Yeah, it was a South Euclid company, you said.
It
Yeah.
was, okay, that's what I was wondering. I saw Mrs. Fagan's answer, but I didn't know for sure if that was the same company. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions or comments? Roll call on the motion to approve.
Mr. DeJohn,
Yes.
Mrs. Finney,
Yes.
Mrs. Teresi,
Yes.
Mr. Balstria,
Yes.
Mr. Mano,
Yes.
Mrs. Sabetta,
Yes.
Mrs. Snyder.
Yes. Resolution 2021-6 has been approved. Resolution number 2021-7, Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Resolution 2021-07, a resolution approving a lot consolidation of Kyogre County permanent parcel numbers 861-28-001, 861-28-002, 861-28-028, 861-28-030, 861-28-041, 861-28-044, and 861-24-056, 5834 to 5926 Mayfield Road, so as to create one parcel. First reading.
Thank you. Is there a motion to suspend the rules?
Move.
Move, Finney.
Moved by Mr. DeJohn, second by Mrs. Finney. Roll call on the motion to suspend.
Mrs. Teresi.
Yes.
Mrs. Sabetta.
Yes.
Mrs. Finney.
Yes.
Mr. Mano.
Yes.
Mr. DeJohn.
Yes.
Mr. Balstria.
Yes.
Mrs. Snyder.
Yes. Is there a motion to approve?
Move.
Moved by Mr. Balestreya, second by Mrs. Sabetta. This is a lot consolidation at Mayland Plaza and was presented to the Planning Commission at the February 15th meeting. It was a 5-0 vote in favor of the consolidation. Mr. Balestreya, would you like to add anything?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Only the fact that I never realized there were so many different parcels within the plaza. So the owner-developer has requested 7 of those lots be consolidated into one parcel. And again, as I stated, it was approved by the engineer and approved unanimously by the Planning Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Balestreya. Are there any questions? Roll call on the motion to approve.
Mr. Balstria.
Yes.
Mrs. Teresi.
Yes.
Mrs. Sabetta.
Yes.
Mr. DeJohn.
Yes.
Mrs. Finney.
Yes.
Mr. Mano.
Yes.
Mrs. Snyder.
Yes. This resolution has now been adopted. Resolution number 2021-8, Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Resolution 2021-08, a resolution commending Christine DeFranco upon her retirement from the Police Department of the City of Mayfield Heights, Ohio. First reading.
Is there a motion to suspend the rules?
Move, Finney.
Moved by Mrs. Finney, second by Mr. Balestreya. Roll call on the motion to suspend.
Mrs. Finney.
Yes.
Mr. DeJohn.
Yes.
Mr. Mano.
Yes.
Mr. Balstria.
Yes.
Mrs. Sabetta.
Yes.
Mrs. Teresi.
Yes.
Mrs. Snyder.
Yes. Is there a motion to approve?
Moved.
Moved by Mr. Manos, second by Mrs. Teresi. Mayor, were you going to read?
The 2021, 8, 9, and 11, the recipients are not here this evening. So we're just going to, if you just pass those, we're going to give those to the department heads, and then we're going to have a separate ceremony with them present at a later time.
That's nice. Thank you. We'd like to congratulate Christine for all her years of hard work. I know she'll be missed. Roll call on the motion to approve.
Mrs. Sabetta.
Yes.
Mr. Mano.
Yes.
Mr. Balstria.
Yes.
Mrs. Teresi.
Yes.
Mrs. Finney.
Yes.
Mr. DeJohn.
Yes.
Mrs. Snyder.
Yes. Resolution 2021-8 has been approved. Resolution 2021-9, Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Resolution 2021-9, a resolution commending Angela Ionero Griesmer upon her retirement from the Finance Department of the City of Mayfield Heights, Ohio. First reading.
Is there a motion to suspend the rules?
So moved.
Move, Finney.
Moved by Mrs. Teresi, second by Mrs. Finney. Roll call on the motion to suspend.
Mr. Mano.
Yes.
Mr. Balstria.
Yes.
Mr. DeJohn.
Yes.
Mrs. Sabetta.
Yes.
Mrs. Teresi.
Yes.
Mrs. Finney.
Yes.
Mrs. Snyder.
Yes. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Teresi, second by Mr. Balestreya. We'd also like to congratulate Angela for all her years of service here. We wish you well.
Barney.
Roll call
Is
on the
now
motion
in the
to approve.
conference.
Mr. DeJohn.
Yes.
Mrs. Finney.
Yes.
Mrs. Teresi,
Yes.
Mr. Belstria,
Yes.
Mr. Mano,
Yes.
Mrs. Sabetta,
Yes.
Mrs. Snyder.
Yes, this resolution has now been adopted. We already did 21-10, so we'll move to resolution number 2021-11. Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Resolution 2021-11, a resolution commending Anita Passani upon her retirement from the Police Department of the City of Mayfield Heights, Ohio. First reading.
Is there a motion to suspend the rules?
Moved.
Moved by Mr. Mano, second by Mr. DeJohn. Roll call on the motion to suspend.
Mrs. Teresi,
Yes.
Mrs. Sabetta,
Yes.
Mrs. Finney,
Yes.
Mr. Mano,
Yes.
Mr. DeJohn,
Yes.
Mr. Belstria,
Yes.
Mrs. Snyder.
Yes. Is there a motion to approve?
Move, Finney.
Moved by Mr. Mano, second by Mrs. Finney. Again, we would like to congratulate Anita for all her years of service. The police department will really miss having you there. Roll call on the motion to approve.
Mr. Belstria,
Yes.
Mrs. Teresi,
Yes.
Mrs. Sabetta,
Yes.
Mr. DeJohn,
Yes.
Mrs. Finney,
Yes.
Mr. Mano,
Yes.
Mrs. Snyder.
Yes. Resolution 2021-11 has been adopted. Moving to ordinances, we'll start off with ordinance number 2021-3. Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ordinance number 2021-03, an ordinance amending Chapter 121 of the Codified Ordinances of the City titled Council, Rules of Debate, by amending Section 121.02J. Third reading.
Is there a motion to approve?
Move, Finney.
Moved by Mrs. Finney,
Second.
second by Mr. Balestrea. This was an ordinance introduced by Mr. Balestrea. He discussed why he was in favor of this ordinance. We also had a legislative committee meeting that these next few items were discussed at. At this time, is there any member of council that would like to make any comments or ask any questions? Mr. Mano.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I put a statement together. I've given a copy to the secretary. My opinion on ordinances 2021-3, 4, 5, and 9. After the discussion at the Legislative Committee on February 17th, my opinion on these ordinances is as follows. In effect, they diminish council's authority and create a quasi-oversight of the council president position. We can do our job without a codified mandate. As a longest-serving member of the council, it seems as though council's esteem and authority is slowly being eroded. Our elected body must stay true to its purpose, that is, to produce legislation to protect the interests of the residents of the city and to prosper the city on its path into the future. We are elected to serve the people, not to further ourselves or any administration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mano. Does any other council person have anything else to add? Okay, roll call on the motion to approve.
Mrs. Finney,
Yes.
Mr. DeJohn,
No.
Mr. Mano,
No.
Mr. Belstria,
Yes.
Mrs. Sabetta,
No.
Mrs. Teresi,
No.
Mrs. Snyder.
No. This ordinance has been defeated. Ordinance number 2021-4, Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. An ordinance amending Chapter 121 of the Codified Ordinances of the City titled Council, Committees, by amending Section 121.02L. Third reading.
Is there a motion to approve?
Move, Finney.
Moved by Mrs. Finney, second
Second.
by Mr. Balestrea. Again, this ordinance was introduced by Mr. Balestrea, also discussed in the legislative subcommittee meeting. Is there any further discussion from council? Seeing none, roll call on the motion to approve.
Mrs. Sabetta,
No.
Mr. Mano,
No.
Mr. Belstria,
Yes.
Mrs. Teresi,
No.
Mrs. Finney,
Yes.
Mr. DeJohn,
No.
Mrs. Snyder.
No. This ordinance has not been adopted. Ordinance number 2021-5, Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ordinance number 2021-05, an ordinance amending Chapter 121 of the Codified Ordinances of the City titled Council, reintroduction by enacting Section 121.02V, third reading.
Is there a motion to approve?
Move.
Move.
Moved by Mr. Belstrea, second by Mrs. Finney. This was another proposed change to our codified ordinance in Section 121, and also was discussed at the Legislative Committee meeting. Does
Is
any
now
member of
in the
council
conference.
have any questions or comments? Roll call on the motion to adopt.
Mr. Mano.
No.
Mr. Belstrea.
Yes.
Mr.
Is now in
DeJohn.
the conference.
No.
Mrs. Sabetta.
No.
Mrs. Teresi.
No.
Mrs. Finney.
Yes.
Mrs. Snyder.
No. This ordinance, number 2021-5, has been defeated. Ordinance number 2021-6, Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ordinance number 2021-06, an ordinance amending the zone map of the city of Mayfield Heights, Ohio, so as to rezone the property known as 6200 Mayfield Road, Mayfield Heights, Ohio. Cuyahoga County permanent parcel numbers 863-05-059 and 863-07-133 from the current U4 Local Retail and Wholesale District to U5 Automotive District in the city of Mayfield Heights and declaring an emergency. Third reading.
Is there a motion to approve?
Moved.
Moved by
Moved,
Mr.
Benny.
Mano,
Second.
second by Mr. Belstrea. All of you have heard from Mr. Murphy during his report earlier this evening. This is rezoning from the current U4 district to the new local retail wholesale district, U5 Automotive District. Mr. Murphy, is there anything you would like to add?
Nothing at this point unless there are questions.
Does any council member have any questions? Mr. DeJohn?
Yes, I did vote against this when it came up, I don't know, what, month or two ago, possibly? But anyways, I just wanted to explain why I'm going to vote against this now, is because I think we're opening up Pandora's box here by creating any automobile dealership zones here in the city. And I know we've never had it before, but although we've had automobile dealerships, but I don't think it was necessary to create specific zones. These automobile dealerships are allowed to operate there, and it's not like we can kick them out, so why did we go ahead and create a new district for them? So, again, I'm going to vote no for this because I think we're opening up Pandora's box and setting a precedence. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. DeJohn. Mrs. Tressi, did you have a question? No. I thought you went like this. I'm sorry, I thought you went like this. Any further questions or comments from council? Roll call on the motion to adopt.
Mr. DeJohn.
No.
Mrs. Finney.
Yes.
Mrs. Teresi.
Yes.
Mr. Belstrea.
Yes.
Mr. Mano.
Yes.
Mrs. Sabetta.
Yes.
Mrs. Snyder.
Yes, this ordinance has now been approved. Ordinance number 2021-9, Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ordinance number 2021-09, an ordinance amending Chapter 121 of the Codified Ordinances of the City titled Council by amending Section 121.01 regarding term of council. Second reading.
Is there a motion to suspend the rules? Moved by
Move,
Mrs.
Benny.
Sabetta, second by Mr. Mano. Roll call on the motion to suspend.
Mrs. Teresi.
No.
Mrs. Sabetta.
Yes.
Mrs. Finney.
Yes.
Mr. Mano.
No.
Mr. DeJohn.
Yes.
Mr. Belstrea.
Yes.
Mrs. Snyder.
Yes. Is there a motion to approve?
Move.
Moved.
Moved by Mrs. Finney, second by Mr. Belstrea. This is amending Section 121 of the Codified Ordinance that was also discussed at the Legislative Committee meeting. It is defining the word term for council. Does any member of council have any questions? Mr. DeJohn?
So, Mr. Murphy, this is just a definition of the term of council and nothing more. How was it defined before this?
Before this, I couldn't find anywhere in the codified ordinances where the term, the phrase term of council was defined. What it read was the organizational meeting held in January after the election until the organizational meeting held in January 2 years later. So this defines that term of council is that 2-year period in between elections when council is set as a 7-member body. And every time there is an election, there are either,
Has left the conference.
every time there is an election, there are 3 or 4 new members of council. They may be the same members, but it's a new council term. So it just makes it easier and defines the fact that the council term consists of 2 years. And I had sent out a memo indicating this is the way that the federal government conducts their legislative proceedings, as well as the way the state government conducts its legislative proceedings.
So just a clarification.
In my mind, it's just a clarification, yes.
Nothing has changed.
Nothing has changed. You still have an election of some number of councilmen, and even in odd-numbered years, and then the new council takes place in even-numbered years, right? Yeah, I got that right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Are there any other questions or comments? Roll call on the motion to adopt.
Mr. Belstria,
Yes?
Mrs. Teresi,
No.
Mrs. Sabetta,
Yes.
Mr. DeJohn,
Yes.
Mrs. Finney,
Yes.
Mr. Mano,
No.
Mrs. Snyder,
Yes. This ordinance has now been adopted. Ordinance number 2021-12, Mr. Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ordinance number 2021-12, an ordinance amending the original appropriations ordinance number 2020-31 for the current expenses and other expenditures of the City of Mayfield Heights, Ohio, for the fiscal year ending December 31, 2021. Specifically, the transfer and supplemental appropriations of funds in various accounts and declaring an emergency. First reading.
Thank you. Is there a motion to suspend the rules?
Move.
Moved by Mrs. Sabetta, second by Mr. DeJohn. Roll call.
Mrs. Finney,
Yes.
Mr. DeJohn,
Yes.
Mr. Mano,
Yes.
Mr. Belstria,
Yes?
Mrs. Sabetta,
Yes.
Mrs. Teresi,
Yes.
Mrs. Snyder,
Yes. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Belstria, second by Mrs. Teresi. Everyone should have received the memorandum from the Director of Finance from February 17, 2021. This ordinance appropriates funds into various accounts that were provided in the memo. The departments consist of Public Safety, Fire, Police, Cemetery, CPA, and Parks and Recreation. Mrs. Fagan, is there anything you would like to add?
No, I think the working copy that I distributed had the legend attached, which explained these changes, and I think that pretty much covered everything.
Thank you. Is there any questions for Mrs. Fagan? Call on the motion to approve.
Mrs. Sabetta,
Yes.
Mr. Mano,
Yes.
Mr. Belstria,
Yes?
Mrs. Teresi,
Yes.
Mrs. Finney,
Yes.
Mr. DeJohn,
Yes.
Mrs. Snyder,
Yes. This motion has been approved. Tonight on our agenda for motions, there are no motions to be considered by council this evening. So at this time, I would like to make a motion to adjourn into executive session.
So moved.
Moved by Mrs. Teresi,
Firefighters of Local
second by
1500.
Mrs. Finney.
Has left the conference.
Roll call on the motion to move into executive session.
Mr. Mano,
Yes.
Mr. Belstria,
Yes?
Mr. DeJohn,
Yes.
Mrs. Sabetta,
Yes.
Mrs. Teresi,
Yes.
Mrs. Finney,
Yes.
Mrs. Snyder.
Yes. We will now adjourn into executive session. It is 8:13. I will need everyone to please clear the council chambers. Thank you.